fit in? Tell us a little bit about yourself. And then ask the question. But it was a wonderful history class.
I want to tell my students their teacher did not follow instructions. They got a hit on me.
You ready to start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Peters. I'm Assistant Chief Wayne Clark, the Duval County School Police Department.
Good afternoon. My name is Brenda Ford from Newtown Success Zone and AmeriCorps as support coach.
Hi, my name is Michelle Spence, and I am with an educational technology publishing company, and I'm a resident of Duval County Schools.
Jay King, I have 2 daughters in Duval County Public Schools, and I'm the SAC chair for one of our middle schools.
My name is Patty Miracle. I've been through Duval County Schools, up through graduation. I have 3 children that went through Duval County Schools, and am currently a kindergarten teacher, and I've taught for 16 years.
Hi, Felita Tutt, Duval County Council PTA President.
Good afternoon, I'm Julia Menifee. I'm a CRT data entry clerk at Rutledge Pearson Elementary School.
Hi, Jenny Bird, representing Board Member Scott Shine. I'm a retired administrator from Miami-Dade County Public Schools.
My name is Carrie Halligan. I'm primarily a mom. I have 4 children who are students in Duval County, and I am a very active volunteer in the schools.
Mr. Peters, I am Tahara Jackson. I'm an educator at Robert E. Lee High School. I am also the SAC chair at my son's school, Fort Caroline Middle School, which will soon be Fort Caroline Middle School of the Arts. And welcome.
Hi, Mr. Peterson. My name is LaTanya Mitchell. I'm a 4th grade teacher at Pinedale Elementary School.
All right, Mr. Peters. 2 parts. We would like for you to first introduce yourself to us. And then secondly, please describe why you have chosen and included the Duval County Public School District in your career plans. What aspects of our school district and our region have attracted you and brought you here to Jacksonville, Florida today?
Thank you so much. Before I get started, though, I just want to say Happy Education Week to all the educators out there. And more importantly, Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers. Exciting time. Can't wait to get home and celebrate with my wife. I'm here today because education changed my life. And when I think about education, I think about a 65-year-old lady who adopted her grandsons who are age 7 and age 4 because their mom was about to be sentenced to 3 to 5 years of prison. When my grandmother adopted my brother and I, she was 65 years old, and she had a 2nd grade education. But she had a PhD in discipline. She could swing a switch. And I say that because only having a 2nd grade education made me completely dependent upon my teachers to help me reach my full potential. And I'm reminded of a situation when I was in the 10th grade. And I always tell folks I was a middle school principal and a high school principal. But during my middle school years, I would have fruit to characterize my students. So I would have my apples, my peaches, my plums, and my coconuts. I was a coconut. But if you know anything about a coconut, it has a very hard exterior. Once you get into that exterior, you have a very sweet milk. And I say that because I'm reminded of a situation in the 10th grade. And I was cutting up in class. I was being a coconut. And I remember my teacher saying, "Pete, get up." So I got up. And she looked at me and she said, "Boy, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "Well, Doc, I'm tall. I'm in the 10th grade. I play basketball. I'm on varsity. I'm pretty good. I'd love to go to Florida State and play basketball." She looked at me and she said, "Boy, sit down. You're not college material." So I sat down. But I also remember Miss Robinson, my 10th grade teacher. And I was an equal opportunity coconut. She'd get it all too. Now, I remember one day, Ms. Robinson, she would, back in the days, you can pick them up by the ears a little bit and take them outside. Ms. Robinson took me outside and she pulled those glasses down on her nose and she looked at me and she said, "Pete, let me tell you something. You're not gonna tab my class. You're gonna sit your keister down and you don't get this work. I don't care anything about your mom being in prison. I don't care anything about you not knowing who your father is. I don't care anything about your grandmother can't read. What I care about is you. And what you need to understand that this is a very difficult world for people who look like you that are not educated. I'm not kicking you out of my class. I'm not suspending you. I'm not calling your grandmother because you know she's gonna kill you. You're gonna get this lesson because I love you and I believe in you. And you've got one option, son, and that's to be successful." Those words, that conversation happened almost 30 years ago, but I remember them as if it were this morning when I told my wife, "I love you." What we tell children, it absolutely matters. Every child deserves a quality education. When I think about my two brothers, 18 years old, sentenced to 10 years in prison. My younger brother, shot and killed in gun violence. Their journey is very different than my journey. I'm raising two young men at home that I'm trying to give the world. And I know in giving them the world, it starts with a world-class education. So whether you're in Eureka Gardens or Meriden or San Marcos, or you live off Moncrief, every child deserves a good education. Everybody didn't have my story, and that's a blessing. Our job is to take our students where they are and take them where they need to be. I am so drawn to this position for several reasons. I was listening on TV and I heard the education chairwoman for the NAACP talk about, we want a superintendent that has large urban school district experience. Well, I can check that box. Orlando, Charlotte, Chicago, Houston, and now Hillsborough. We also want a superintendent that can build community and understands what it means to understand all different types of community. I can check that box. I heard our teachers loud and clear. Our teacher said, we want someone that understands their way around the classroom. I can check that box. I started out as a fourth and fifth grade teacher in Apopka, Florida. Anybody heard of Apopka? Yeah, Apopka, Florida, Phyllis Wheatley Elementary. I heard our principal say, "Hey, we want someone that understands what it means to be a principal." I've been a middle school principal. I've been a high school principal. I've been a principal of a struggling Title I school, and I've been a principal of one of the highest performing schools in the city. So I understand the unique needs of our community. Being a proud United States Navy veteran, I understand what it means to be in Hong Kong and you get a call or a letter and say your grandmother's sick or your brother's in trouble. We have a huge military footprint in our district. And I know that we do a great job engaging them, but I want them to know if I have the opportunity to be your superintendent, that they will always have an extended family in Duval County Public Schools. I'm excited about this opportunity. And if you know anything about me, you've had an opportunity to read my resume, you know we are well traveled. My oldest son is 20, he's in Pensacola. My youngest son and my wife, he's 13, 7th grade. We'll be transitioning here, hopefully. We've been on an amazing journey that has taken us to some great cities and some amazing experiences. We believe that that journey leads us to Jacksonville as our destination. We're looking for a destination. And I looked my son in the eye and I said, "Son, our next stop will be that stop," because this is important for him. These are the years when you begin to develop your lifelong friends. So as a father, as a protector and a provider, the first thing I think about is the quality of life. Duval County provides a quality of life that we're absolutely excited about. So I thank you for this opportunity.
Mr. Peters,
Yes, ma'am.
what types of decisions or responsibilities do you delegate to others, to include employees or outsourcing? And how do you monitor or manage accountability for performance of those who are responsible?
Yeah. So I think it's important that I talk about just my belief around delegating and leadership, which means I like to see what you're good at, where your strengths lie. And theoretically, if I align your strengths to the duties that you're good at, there's a propensity that you're going to be very successful. The monitoring and accountability piece, I mean, that's the easy piece. It's sort of the red, the yellow, the green. It's the data, the hard, technical, tactical work. The tough piece is how do you coach people and make people better? And I'll give you a quick example. In that other place where I used to work, we walk in and say, listen, I want you to be a better principal. And I'm going to come back next week, and you better be a better principal. And I come back next week, and nothing's changed. I thought I told you I want you to be a better principal or a better teacher. Now I'm going to come back next week, and it better be better. And I come back next week, and nothing has changed. It's not better, so now I've got to write you up. What I've learned is, at what point do we sit down and talk about what better looks like and define better and actually help you understand what that journey looks like? So when it comes to holding folks accountable, when it comes to managing folks and assigning duty, I like to take a strengths-based approach and talk about what's going well versus what's not going well. Because we know we've got the red, yellow, green stop sign. But if we look at what's going well and try to accentuate that, I've found that that's a very positive approach when we talk about leading and holding folks accountable. Who's my timekeeper? I want to make sure. I want to make sure I don't get too lengthy.
Mr. Peters, please give an example of how you've developed a shared vision of a preferred outcome with a board and key stakeholders. How did you implement it? What were the outcomes? And how would that inform your process here in Duval County?
Yeah, so I'll use something that's very familiar to the Duval County family, or even if you're in Florida, House Bill 7069. And we had to think through external operators. So last year, if you were a school that was in differentiated accountability for 3 years, the state came in and said, you've got to hire and work with an external operator to come in and have command and control of the school. As you can imagine, a number of our communities were very frustrated, and they were upset, saying, how are you going to give our schools over the charter and all of these things that they were upset about. So one of the things that I did, I said, we've got to do this, but the way that we're going to do it is we're going to do it together. So the first thing that we had a town hall meeting. Let's just talk about it. What are the implications for the bill? What are we being asked to do? And what role can we play? So the first thing we did, we just unpacked the bill as a community. And then what are the shared agreements that we can have among all of us? So one of the commitments, several of the commitments that came out of that conversation was we want to be a part, when I say we, the community, we want to be a part of drafting the RFP. So not a problem. We sat down and talked about what criteria we wanted to put in place for the agencies. What do we think the agencies need to be able to exhibit? How are we going to evaluate them? The connection to the community. So we had a combination of teachers, administrators, CTA, our community members of pastors, the NAACP. We just spent a lot of time in crafting the language. The second piece is after we write the RFP and after we publish it and we have companies that express interest, we want to be part of the conversation that actually screens and selects. Not a problem. So we nailed it down. We had 5 companies to apply. We brought them all down, and we had a group in one of our education ancillary sites. They gave their presentation, and the parents, the community, and the school district personnel made a decision together. So at the end of the day, we landed on it, and it was a very contentious decision initially, because people didn't quite understand the bill, and we know what happens theoretically when the state comes in and sends mandates. It really frustrates people sometimes. So at the end of the day, this was a process that was very contentious. It hit a lot of our communities sort of in the gut, but the way that we worked through it was least intrusive, it was respectful, and it built community. So now we're at the part to where we selected our external operator. They've given a presentation around what their role is going to look like, how they're going to engage the community, and the decision-making authority that they're going to support and advocate to the community.
Okay, so my question is this my turn? Or it's your turn. Oh, sorry, her turn.
Sorry for the mix-up. Mr. Peters, What has been the most difficult decision you had to make with a governing board? What was your role and the role of the board, and how did you handle the reaction to this decision?
Yeah, so when I talk to the board members and I have frequent one-on-ones, I always lead with, part of my role is to protect you, right? I need to depoliticize this conversation. But I'll tell you, one of the things, if you followed us in the media lately, just like Duval County, we had been battling with $147 million budget deficit. And we've had to make some very tough decisions. And these tough decisions aren't foreign. When I was in Chicago, we had a $600 million deficit, $900 million in Houston, 173. So I don't know why they just keep following me. And maybe it's me. Hopefully not. But having to make some really, really tough choices. And one of the choices that we've had to work through is some very sensitive sacred cows. And I know that some of those sacred cows exist in our community here. Courtesy busing. That was one of the things that we had been given courtesy busing to a lot of our families for a long time because there have been hazardous walking conditions in the district, but no one had gone back to see if those conditions were corrected. So over time, it doesn't become courtesy, it just becomes a service. So having to go back and undo that, and that's a board's decision. They've got to make some very tough decisions around not allowing this service again. So helping the board understand that this decision is going to help us reach financial viability. And we stood or stand to save about $10 million every year just because of courtesy busing. And I'll even give you another one. We've had for about 25 years, about 10,000 students that are late to school every day. And it's not because of their own. It's because of our busing system. It's because we didn't have enough time to drop kids off to high school, pick the next group up, and get them to school on time. That hurts kids. The first thing that I said when I sat before you today is every child deserves a quality education. It is not okay for the system to allow 10,000 students to be late every day. And most of those students were our students of color. So as a result, we had to propose to the board a new bell time. Starting high school at 8:30, elementary at 7:30, and middle school at 9:30. As you can imagine, that new start time can be significantly disruptive to our families, and we want it to be very respectful. So we started early and often. So we made the decision, made the recommendation, and the board voted a year ago to give our families an entire year to begin to adjust. But it is very difficult when you upset the apple cart of a lot of our community members who depend on us and our families for a number of things, but it was the right thing to do for children.
Actually, it's my turn this time. Okay, so our question is around lobbying. What role, what experience do you have in working with state lobbyists for funding for education and also helping with some of those unfunded mandates?
So a couple of things. So we've got our intergovernmental relations team who do a lot of the work on our behalf. But I will say we were fortunate enough to have Commissioner Stewart at one of our schools a couple months ago. And we were talking about the implications for the new bill that has come out. And at that time, they were thinking about not allowing the concordance score students to take the PERT as a graduation requirement and increasing the ACT and PSAT scores. So the opportunity there was to engage the commissioner directly. In that conversation, we had one of our high school principals, and we were able to get one of our rockstar high school principals to actually go to Tallahassee and talk about the implications and the impact that it would have if we were to change the requirements without giving school districts time to catch up. A number of our folks, our legislators, don't necessarily see things through the lens of a teacher and a principal. So for a guy that has walked the halls and sat in classrooms, and I started out as a substitute teacher. I know what it means to be a substitute teacher or a regular teacher, assistant principal, dean. It's a very different rub. And I was meeting with cabinet earlier today, and I said, we're as a cabinet, we're different. If we get frustrated, I get to go in my office and close the door and say, listen, I need a minute. But if you are working in the school as an aide or as a substitute, as a teacher, as a principal, you don't get that break. You have to turn to the next customer, the next teacher and say, baby, how you doing? So we have to understand who we work for and who we support. And a lot of times, it's very important that we help our family in Tallahassee and our local legislators to understand the implications that it has on the people that are doing the work. And then the second piece is about House Bill, the Guardian Bill, just helping them understand the impact that it will have to give teachers guns, or the impact it would have on the district's budget to have to now fund security officers for every school. We've got 240 sites. That's a lot of schools to mandate we must have an armed security guard. So let's talk about the implications and the funding that needs to occur. So those are two things that we've talked about, and we've tried to lobby really hard just for people to listen, maybe think differently about how we allocate funds.
Okay, Mr. Peters, how do we ensure that we are being fiscally responsible with our financial resources, and how do we communicate that with our board and community stakeholders?
So the first thing, as a school district, we are a labor-intensive organization. It takes a lot of people to do what we do, and I stress people. We've got three primary assets as a school district: people, time, and money. And how we use those assets literally separates us from other organizations. So when we think about being fiscally sound, we need to make certain that we are parsing our priorities. So the theory of action or the board's strategic plan needs to align to our spending. I tell my son, I'll show you your future if you show me your friends. Show me where you spend your money and I'll show you what you value. And then the other piece is transparency. We have to be financial stewards of taxpayers' money. When I talk to parents on the phone, I say, you pay my bills. You pay my salary. I am beholden to you. It makes sense that you understand what's happening in your child's school. It makes sense that you understand and have the transparency from a school district who has a multi-million-dollar budget. The public can trust us with that, and we've got to make sure that we're stewards of it. And also, we want to make sure that we keep the board informed and give them the data that they need to make sound financial decisions. And we've got some tough days ahead. We've got a $62 million deficit, budget shortfall that we've got to close. And I know that our biggest price tag, about 85% of our budget, is human capital, it's payroll. But there are other things that we can do before we look to people first. Because I always say our people are our most important asset. This is a people business.
I apologize. Mr. Peters.
Yes, ma'am.
What has been the most unpopular decision you've had to make, and how did you handle the reaction to this decision?
Just one? I'll use one that's recently been, I think, in the Jacksonville newspaper. So there was a situation at one of my middle schools a few years ago, about a year and a half ago, where there was a substitute teacher who was doing something under the desk. And there were two middle school students saying, oh my God, this guy is pleasuring himself. So immediately we get into safety and reaction mode. So my principal immediately removes the sub. My principal immediately contacts Children and Family Services, immediately contacts the school resource officer and launches an investigation. So she checked all the boxes. Interviewing students, the whole 9 yards. There is no data or implications that the teacher did anything wrong. Some students said, well, I didn't see anything. Some say, well, he was playing with his phone. And even other two students that accused said, well, it sort of looked like. So there is no data to support implicating. But as an added safety measure, I made sure that we did not bring this person back to our children. We made a mistake though. What happened was we contacted the two parents that the student made the initial accusation. We did not contact the rest of the parents in the classroom. I'm a middle school father, and you had better believe I want to know if something that's serious happened in my son's classroom. We dropped the ball on that, and we got some negative press. The tough decision comes in, do I throw this principal under the bus, or do I stand up and be a leader and accept responsibility? So when the media came and said, someone's gotta pay for this or speak out to this, I didn't throw my principal under the bus. I sat there and said, you know what, as the chief of schools, it is my responsibility. And let me share with you something. As a principal makes 60 decisions every day, at least 60 decisions. And when you multiply 60 decisions by 250 principals, that's 14,000 decisions every day that I'm directly responsible. You take those 14,000 decisions, or you take those and multiply them by 180 days, that's 2.5 million decisions that I'm responsible for every year. Now, I'm not so naive to believe that some decisions aren't the best, especially when you're faced with a bad decision and a worse decision. But what I will not do is I will not throw my principal under the bus. We're not going to talk again. The reporter was pushing really hard. You should fire the principal. I said, we're not firing the principal. What are you going to do? We're going to handle the situation. What happened was I took the responsibility. And I said, at the end of the day, it's my responsibility. I'm the chief of schools. We should have communicated better. And I called every parent personally. Listen, I apologize. You absolutely should have received a call. I'm a father, and I wanted to receive a call. It won't happen again. So the lesson is that as a leader, you protect your people and you stand up for your people. Now, did we have a conversation behind closed doors? Absolutely. Baby girl, she took one for you. I'm not interested in taking any more, but it was a learning lesson. And I need her fighting for children and not fighting for her job.
Amen.
And that's the role that I intend to play if I get this great opportunity.
All right, question 7, going to question 8. Timing is good.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. You've already talked about Senate Bill 7026. So in light of the recent active shooter event in Parkland, Florida, and the legislature passing the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Safety Act, what would be your vision and strategy to address the short-term and long-term vulnerabilities identified in the district?
Yeah. So I think part of the challenges is creating safe spaces in our schools without creating prison-like mentalities. In the city of Chicago, there are 400,000 kids, 600 schools. Every high school I work in is a metal detector. There's a feel that comes with that. But we absolutely want to ensure our families and our communities that our kids are safe. So we've done things by making sure that we limit, that all 100% of our schools have controlled access, that there's one way in and one way out, that's monitored. We're looking at things, do we have a buzzer system where people can buzz in and buzz out? But I also want to remind the community that in Sandy Hook, they had a buzzer system. But we do know that there are measures that we can take to make people feel safe, because we want our students and our teachers to feel safe. And we want our parents also to feel that they're sending their children to a safe school. And the other piece is, how do we deploy resources to ensure that each one of our schools have trained security personnel, as if the unthinkable happens, that we have someone that can respond expertly and quickly to these situations. So I think there's a combination of hardening schools and making sure that we control access. And some of the things that we've done in our district ensure that our schools have the buzzer system so we know who's coming on our campus. And the third piece will be to ensure that we've got trained individuals to make sure that they're policing our school to make sure that kids are safe.
Hi. My question represents what teachers want to know about your style. So some superintendents prefer teachers to follow provided lesson plans, curriculum guides, I can tell you know where this is going, and timelines to ensure that all teachers across the county are on the same page.
Yeah.
Whereas other superintendents allow teachers to use the district provided materials as a tool and allow more autonomy with lesson planning, as long as all lessons are guided by the standards. So in your current position, what is your personal philosophy and leadership style with regard to how the provided curriculum is used Do you prefer district-led timelines and curriculum guides, or do you allow standards-based lessons with autonomy that allows teachers to use the provided curriculum only as a tool?
I think you've already answered my question. And forgive me, because I'm going to use some semi-technical language. So for the non-educators, I woefully apologize. We are on a journey in Hillsborough County. And I'll tell you my philosophy and what I believe, but I'll also preface it with I've got a lot of listening and learning to do before I come to this place and start to make decisions. Let me just be real clear about that. What I will tell you is when you have a managed instruction philosophy or theory of action, and what that means is central office manages instruction. We'll tell you what to teach, when to teach, how to teach, what happens when kids don't do it, and what assessment to give them. That is a theory of action, and I've worked in districts where we've had that, and it's worked well. One of the things we've realized in Hillsborough County is that our data has been flat. And what I worry about is when I go to a school in San Marcos, and they're doing the exact same lesson plan, the exact same conversation as a school in perhaps Eureka Gardens. Students are very different. Teachers have to have the flexibility to design learning to meet the needs of the students that are in front of them. I have a very narrow definition for curriculum. My definition for curriculum are the standards. That's what connects us all. We provide the what, and teachers and our experts figure out the how. One of the challenges that I face is, what does that actually look like? And part of the conversation is hinging on this notion of autonomy, teacher autonomy, site-based autonomy. I am a huge believer in site-based autonomy. My district will tell you now, my whole mantra is how do we give teachers the resources and the support to do what they do best. What I found as a challenge is when you transition from this managed instruction to managed performance empowerment, there has to be a lot of professional development that comes. And I think of my building principals. We've got a lot of building principals who've done great jobs, and they've been around for a long time. Their experience with curriculum is I need to go in and make sure that the lesson plan is posted, that we're on page 7, that we're giving the assessment, and then we're reacting to the data. Now what we're asking principals to do is walk in the classroom and determine are the indicators in place that kids are learning. How do you know that kids are learning? And how do you help teachers deconstruct and construct learning in their PLCs? So when you walk into a PLC and teachers are talking about lesson plans, what are the questions that you ask? How do you know? What are kids saying when they've mastered this standard? That's a very rich skill set. But I truly believe when we say all kids deserve a quality education, we've got to give teachers, schools, and principals and community to be able to design the learning that looks best for their kids. We talk about culturally sensitive material. Our communities are vastly different. There are materials and cultures that we want to be respectful of all, but we also want kids to see text and books and movies with people that look like them. That happens at the local level. I'm at central office. I can't control 200 schools from central office. It's just not practical. We're too big. I have to depend on the experts at the site to make the best adjustments and modifications to learning to ensure that learning happens. When we started to do that, our data started to trend up because we had hit a plateau. And like I said, that theory of action works to a certain point, but there's going to come a time where you're going to have to differentiate instruction, where you're going to have to look at the kids in your class and say, you need this, and you need this, and I need to design learning. That necessarily doesn't happen with a cookie cutter curriculum. So at the end of the day, my philosophy is the people who we pay to be experts that make the magic happen, give them the tools and resources to do what they do better, support them and give them feedback, and get out of the way.
All right. Okay, so this is about community engagement. Please describe your experience working with groups in an organization with varying interests and agendas. Describe how you were able to achieve consensus and a common vision for the organization with these different groups.
Yeah. So I will, my goodness. So I will give a couple of examples. I'll give one example in particular. We're under a lot of pressure to reform schools. And I don't like reform, I don't like turnaround, but I do like transformation, because that speaks to a journey, that speaks to community, that speaks to a lot of decision makers. One of the things that we're trying to build out in our district currently is this notion of an achievement zone. I think we may call it the innovation zone here, is how do you take your highest need schools, put them together and intensify the supports. That has become a challenge. Some of our communities where we have our focus groups like the NAACP and the Urban League, they're concerned about why are you putting all the schools of color together? Is there a stigma that you are attaching to those schools? Teachers want to know, what does this mean for me? Does it mean I'm going to work longer days? Does it mean that the contract is going to be null and void? Ministers want to know, and our community partners want to know, well, are we still going to be able to partner with these? What about the YMCA? What about the after school program? So you have a wide range of constituents that you have to engage to move a major initiative. So one of the things that we do, we just sit down and talk about it. I cannot denounce the power of talk. We don't all have to agree, but I think we have to be respectful and ensure that everyone has a seat on the table, at the table. When I look at research around underperforming schools, and we know there's a national challenge around getting our best people to our toughest schools, and I ask teachers, what will it take? And the research is so clear. I'll go to a struggling school, but I want to go and I want to work for a transformational leader. And many of us have had experiences where you'll drive 40 miles to work for a great leader, and you would drive 4 to work for somebody that motivates you. A, I want a great leader. B, I don't want to go by myself. I want to go with a bunch of other teachers who want to get after it themselves. And I want that leader to hold me accountable just like she's holding Mrs. Peters accountable. Then the other piece is I want to be able to have some influence, some decision-making authority around the decisions that impact my job. And then the fourth piece? Yeah, it'd be nice to have a little more money. So when we talk to our experts, money is not necessarily the motivator. It's I want to work for a great leader, I want to work on a great team, and I want to have some decision-making authority around what happens in our school. And it would be really, really nice to get paid to do this tough work. But you cannot make that decision in isolation. You have to have people at the table. And in this initiative, we've tried to bring, and it's contentious, it's tough, because people feel very differently about it. But we're going to listen, we're going to hear you, and we're going to make a decision together. And I can't please everybody, but I promise that we'll be at the table together to talk about it.
So this question is about public presence. So tell us about your most demanding public presence experience. What was your role and what was the role of the board?
Yeah, so I'll use an experience when I was in Chicago, and I don't want to send the perception that I was proud about it. But if you read anything about 4 or 5 years ago, we closed 51 schools at one time. Very difficult decision. And at the time, my son, I think, was first grade, second grade, and I remember coming home and say, Kenny, how would you feel if Dad had to close your school? And, he's 7, 8 years old. He's like, well, Dad, all my friends would be gone. I said, no, but all your friends could go with you. Yeah, but that's my school and my teacher, and it's close to home, so I can walk home. So we had that conversation, and then you think about the impact of families when you make a recommendation to close 51 schools. And I remember being in a junior college gymnasium, sitting at a table just like this with the microphone. And I'm looking out at a sea of people because 13 of those schools were in my network. And each one of those people or persons had to come up to the microphone and talk to me and my deputy and my team why we should not consider recommending their school for closure. And I remember families saying, are you ready to have blood on your hands? And you are the Antichrist. And I just talked to this dad this morning, and he's not going to be able to walk his daughter to school anymore because They live across a gang line. And in 20 years of his life, he's never been able to walk on that street. Now you're forcing him to walk across that street and endanger his life. Folks, that's a tough decision. But when you have scores of buildings that are woefully under capacity and the infrastructure is crumbling and you can't afford to purchase iPads and technology and pay teachers and resources, we've got to make some tough decisions. What we did is we closed those 51 schools and we repurposed those students to a higher performing school. We developed transition plans, cultural integration plans. So a year before we closed the schools, we made sure we had pen pal connections, we had field trips with your receiving schools, we had partnerships, but it's still tough. It was still tough. And at the end of the day, we were able to take 51 buildings offline. Think about the money you save with just electricity. And we were able to repurpose some of those dollars back into the classrooms, giving teachers more money, giving more resources, giving more supports, especially in a time where kids bring so many things to school in their backpacks. Social emotional supports are so critical. So we were able to do some things that we had never done before. But also add one thing that we did not do well, that we probably did not think through as best we can. We didn't really think through what we were going to do with the buildings. Because you close 51 buildings, but they're still there and they're mothballed. We didn't think about, should this be a community center? Or can this be a retirement home? Or can this be a clinic? Or perhaps a farmer's market in a neighborhood that we call food deserts where kids have no access to fresh fruits or vegetables. I think that's the opportunity, because what we did, we shut them down and we boarded them up. And what we did not do was work with the community to talk about how we could repurpose these buildings. But that was a very tough decision, and it kept me up a lot of nights.
All right. So let me do a little lighter note, I guess. Give us an example where you faced an authentic crisis within an organization. What happened? Your role in handling it, the results, and most importantly, key things that you learned from this experience.
Yeah. So we know that change happens at the speed of trust. If I don't trust you, it's going to be very difficult to implement change. And when I talked earlier about the transition from the managed instruction theory of action to now giving schools more autonomy, teachers love it. Principals love it. My central office family struggled because that means we would have to change. We would have to change the way that we supported schools. We would have to say, hey, no longer am I the gatekeeper of the money. No longer am I the gatekeeper of the resources. I'm now a partner. So what it meant, instead of central office being this huge lumbering bureaucracy, we had to develop and become an agile organization that can morph to the daily needs of schools. What that means is we had to move some cheese, and people had to think differently and act differently around supporting schools. That was tough. Getting grown folks who've done things a certain way a long time to think and act differently, I'm just gonna be honest, that's very, very difficult. And it takes time. And there's a text that I like to reference. Cotter talks about the 8 steps of change. And in his first step, he talks about build a coalition of the willing. How do you get a group of people to understand and believe in this change, even though they're not sure where the change is coming from? The other piece that I like to reference is a book called Managing Transitions by William Bridges. And in his book, he talks about when you're taking people or organizations through change, there's sort of 3 phases. There's the ending, the neutral zone, and the new beginning. And there are people in every step of that continuum. And there are very specific behaviors that people exhibit when they're in those. If I'm still in the ending, that means I have not let go. And I'm not interested in this change. And you can't tell me anything. If I'm in a neutral zone, it means, you know, I might be okay with it. Can I trust this joker? Let me sort of look at him and see what he's about. 50-50. But if I'm in the new beginning, it means that I've made the transition. I buy into the change, and I'm a willing participant in this journey. As a leader, as a manager, I don't go back for the folks that are still in the ending and start maligning folks, and we help them think through why this change is good. We give them an opportunity to deal with the ending. And it talks about closure. So this process of sort of retooling and redesigning central office to more effectively meet the needs of schools really upset the apple cart with a lot of adults, but it was the right thing to do for kids. And at the end of the day, what we've gotten to, or what we're getting to, is a model where schools, teachers, and principals feel as if they're getting better support than they have traditionally. These are some tough questions.
My question is related to staff. How do you establish a team and mobilize team members to achieve goals? Give an example of a successful project resulting from teamwork.
I think it's important to understand that at the end of the day, you're only as good as the folks that you work with and work for. And also understand that it was important that you get the right people in the right seats on the bus. It's also important that there's clarity of vision and expectation. So those things have to be in place before we can even begin to talk about our best path forward. You have to know what motivates people, what's important to them, what are their triggers. And I'm reminded of a process. And every year, the area superintendents and I, right around January, we have this 2-day conversation around succession planning. We look at principals who are retiring, who are nearing drop, assistant principals who are nearing drop, and we begin to think through how do we subtly and respectfully ensure that we don't have a lapse in leadership. Succession planning can get very, very dicey. When you talk about who's the best leader for the school, or if I've been at the school for 14 years and I think that I need to be the principal because I've been here for 14 years, and I may not have necessarily made the leadership growth around capacity to be able to handle that. And you also have 8 personalities that are very strong executive leaders that feel very strong about their schools and the people that they work with. So you really start to critique and analyze work. And when there's someone that looks across the table and say, why isn't Harrison ready to be a principal? You've been supportive for the last 3 years, and why have you gotten him ready? That's a tough conversation. So to answer your question, I think there are 3 things that you have to be clear around. A, what are the objectives? B, are we looking at the strengths of the people that are doing the work? Are we aligning your strengths to what this objective is? And C, communicating early and often. We cannot deny the importance of communication. The toughest thing is to have a conversation with somebody that you're expected to execute on something, and they look at you and say, well, I didn't know. Or no one told me about it. That's unacceptable. So someone talked about transparency earlier. How do we sit down and have transparent, clear, cogent conversations around the best path forward? How do we engage the group to be collective decision makers? And then C, how do we have a constant communication loop to ensure that we're moving our priorities forward?
Yes.
Okay, we have high and low socioeconomic students. How would you ensure that every student, regardless of socioeconomic status, receives equal access and resources to ensure high achievement? Please give examples of use of facilities, curriculum design, and community input to achieve equal access.
Facilities, curriculum. So I'll give a couple examples, and they may be applicable to our fair city. So when we look at our suburban schools, most in the district I work in are overcrowded. And our constituents and our parents and community, they are really have a rallying cry for relief. And when we look at our schools in our urban core, they're typically under capacity and the infrastructure is crumbling. And our parents and communities are screaming for relief and better resources. Folks, the challenge becomes is how do you take a finite set of resources and distribute them among almost an infinite number of opportunities? And like my grandmother used to say, at the end of I don't have any money left in the month. At some point, you just can't add more water to the soup. It doesn't come soup. So we talk about this whole idea of equity. How do we equitably distribute resources to the students that need it the most? And I can't be a hypocrite. I was raised a child of poverty. I was one of those have-nots. But I'm also a father of two middle-class sons who have no idea of the reality of their father experience. And I'm not interested in taking any resources away from my sons to give to other folks. That becomes the challenge. Because at the end of the day, the conversation is the least of us are the greatest of us. We have to purse our priorities. One of the things that we've done in our district is we've adopted an equity policy. And we believe that we look at need across our district and we ensure that our most needy schools and students get what they need to be successful. But the challenge becomes how do we, and doing that, we talk about this term, a rising tide lifts all boats. We can't forget about our gifted population. We've got some higher achieving students that also need to be pushed. So the challenge becomes how do we lift the floor and the ceiling of academic achievement simultaneously. So when we talk about facilities, it's really about a distribution of resources. And I know that here in Duval County, we have one of the oldest infrastructures in the state. And we're gonna have to go to the public, we're gonna have to strengthen trust, and we're gonna have to ask for help. And that's gonna put us back to that same conversation around transparency. But at the end of the day, we've got to make sure that we've proven to be good financial stewards of the things we've already been given. That's important. When we talk about curriculum, I think that goes without saying. At the end of the day, how do we ensure that each school, each student have the resources that they need? And then the other piece I was just thinking about is one of the challenges that we faced. When it comes to site-based autonomy, it doesn't necessarily mean that, I always share this example, my son was 16 years old, and I give you the keys to go downtown Tampa and maybe watch a movie. But I'm not giving you the keys to drive to Atlanta for the weekend. You hadn't earned that level of autonomy. So part of it is how do we equitably, schools that earn the autonomy to show that they have the ability to make their own decisions, they've got the expertise, go forth and prosper. And then the core of schools that need our intensive support, we absolutely support them. And my final piece, we can't go with this alone. We have to have our post-secondary partners. We have to have our business community. We have to have our preachers and our ministers and our Boys and Girls Club, because when we look at the community and the business world, that's where you incubate new ideas. That's where we get resources that aren't tied up in corporate bureaucracy. So it behooves us to have a well-rounded approach and leverage all of our stakeholders to be able to get what we need.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. Last question. Is there anything else you would like to share with us to support your candidacy?
So I hope through, and thank you, I've hoped through our conversation that there are two things. First of all, I need to be very clear about my journey here. And I realized that I didn't get to this place by happenstance. I'm standing on the shoulders of some folks that have done some great work. And I've counted a privilege to be able to sit here and answer these questions. I hope I've been able to share with you, my 3 core objectives. How do we raise the bar for all children? How do we increase the graduation rate? and how do we close the achievement gap? I am not the type of leader that's going to come up here and say, I've got all the answers. And if that's what you're looking for, I'm sorry, I'm not the one. But I am the type of leader that understands that it takes community, it takes a lot of voices, and it takes as many people around the table to help us continue the greatness as occurred. Folks, we've had some amazing successes in this school district. I look at the tutor results, the NAEP results, and you guys are our competition in Hillsborough County. We're back and forth. So there's some great things that are happening. I count it an absolute joy to be able to sit here and vie for the position of superintendent for Duval Public Schools. And on the behalf of my wife, Tarnisha, Kenny, Devin, we are hopeful that Duval County Schools, Jacksonville, can be our home. Thank you so much.
Mr. Peters, thank you. There's about 3 minutes. If you had a question for the committee, I'm sure 1 or 2 members would be willing to answer it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So I would ask, just whomever wants to respond, you can popcorn out. The incoming superintendent, whomever it may be, what do you see as that one top priority that he or she needs to begin to tackle immediately?
I'm a teacher also. I would like to say it. I feel Duval County has a real problem with turnover with their teachers. And I think a lot of it has been we haven't been treated like professionals. We've been given scripts. In one of our training sessions, as they're demonstrating our new curriculum, they literally said, see how easy this is? Even a substitute could do it. And we just all looked at each other like, are you serious? What did I go to college for then? Yeah. So that's what I see as key. You know, I would hope that if you come here that you're going to keep the communication. You're going to create a forum where we can be honest with you about what we're seeing and feeling. And as far as professional development, one of our best forms of professional development is having time with each other. Because we can go and sit in on training sessions all the time and hear people who have not been in the classroom for years, who are downtown because they weren't good in the classroom, come in and tell us how to do our job. Whereas if we can just spend time with each other, sharing ideas, that's where the excitement comes. That's where the new ideas come. That's where we keep the passion alive. And I just would like for you, you know, if you come here to look at professional development through a different perspective, you're talking about giving us the tools that we need, ask us what we need. I think that a lot of these people in the community would be nauseated if they knew how much stuff we throw away. We're given boxes of stuff that is garbage, and we take it home and secretly put it in our recycle bin. So
I appreciate that. And just real quick, I believe in a 70-20-10 rule when it comes to professional development. 10% maybe conferences and things like that. And we know the research is really clear. 20%, maybe I go to maybe a district level place or ancillary staff development. 70% of PD happens on the job. Job embedded, teachers getting better, reacting and supporting and engaging in PLCs. That's clear. The research is loud and clear around how we get better. We just got to be brave enough to accept the research and get out there and begin to implement what the research says. And the other piece is, I don't want to be coy about it, but we know that there's a range of capacities when we talk about teachers. I've got rock star teachers who've been doing it all their lives, and they can do it in their sleep. And I've got brand new babies that are just out of college, and they need that, just do this. They need that, you do this and we'll help you. That's why I say I think it's disrespectful to not allow a teacher who has capacity to design learning not to do that. I'd feel very inept walking in the classroom saying, hey, this is what I want you to do, and this is what I want it to look like. And you've been doing it probably longer than I've been on this earth. I think that we have to consider that, and I think we have to bring the profession back to teaching. And I firmly believe that.
I saw 2 other people grab from mic. I got a pace of people asking, responding. So I'll take 1 or 2. Keep it short. Either? You okay?
Well, no, she's exactly right. Coming from an educator, and prior to being an educator, I worked with high-risk youth, getting them to the point of where they need to be with less. One of the things, being in the community, not just in the classroom, but being in the community. There needs to be a healing in our community here in Jacksonville, Florida. It needs to be understanding of each other's roles and how it should be played in respect to education. And no disrespect to anyone's title, but it needs to be an understanding. The educators need to be able to educate with an understanding that they went to school to educate. It needs to be the old-fashioned kumbaya. Our children look at us. They look at how we act, how we present ourselves. And if we're always here, there, and everywhere and at bicker on the least things, how can we move them to the next level if we're not at the level that we need to be? So I would say, in all respect, you coming to our awesome city, because Jacksonville is an amazing city, and our county is different, as you know, from any other, and you've been many places. How can we begin, and of course, I'm not asking this as a pastor, but as a superintendent of one of the largest school districts, how do you begin to think, and I'm going to say begin to think, of the process of healing, working towards healing what has taken place in our community in respect to education?
So, that's a loaded question. We can spend about 30 minutes on that. So I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. So I have a saying with our team: hard on the problem, soft on the people. We aggressively attack the problem, and we're soft on the people. This is a people-driven business. We're only successful if we have great people and we respect people. Now, that's not irrespective of holding folks accountable. That absolutely, we have to be held accountable. I know you're not talking about that. The other piece is I got an email from a gentleman. His name is Winston Seabrook. He's a student at Reebok. Seems to be a very popular student. And he emailed me a few weeks ago and said, Mr. Peters, congratulations on being a semifinalist for the Duval County job. And I just want to know what your plan is going to be if we bring you in as our superintendent. And I said, wow, thank you so much. Great question. But then I said, respectfully, I don't want you to take this the wrong way, Winston, but I worry about a superintendent that comes in with the plan. I've done this work all over the country. And the biggest mistake I could do is come in with the plan without, like my grandma say, without knowing nothing. You have to come in, and then what I share with him is, I promise you, I will hit the ground learning versus hit the ground running. And I will listen to people. And I will absolutely make sure that we're at the table in those decisions. Because at the end of the day, and I know, day one, you're going to have to make some tough technical decisions. We've got budget, we've got school starting. So there are technical decisions that have to be made. But the reality is, I don't think anybody is capable of coming in and saying, this is what we need to do, Dave. That's disrespectful to the community, is disrespectful for the folks who've been doing the work, and is disrespectful for the folks that have been supporting this great district for a long, long time. So we want to come in and hopefully be respectful of that, engage that. And like I said earlier, I'm standing on the shoulders of some folks that have done some show enough work. And I want to acknowledge that, and I want to make sure that they are also a part of our community going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're going to go across the hall. I think you got about 10, 12 minutes before you go across to the next group.